Before sunrise, a stone fort sat in San Antonio, quiet and cold. Inside, tired men listened to the night. Outside, an army waited. The place was called the Alamo. Later, people would call it a legend. On this night, it was a building full of fear and stubborn hope. William Barrett Travis stood near a low fire. He was young, yet his eyes looked older than his years. In his hands was a letter he had written and rewritten. For days he had sent messages calling for help, begging for reinforcements, promising that the defenders would not surrender. He did not know if anyone would come. He only knew he had to try. The Alamo had not been built for war. Long ago, it was a mission, a place for prayer and work. People once walked there carrying tools, not rifles. But history changes places without asking. As politics shifted in Texas, the mission was turned into a fort. Rooms became barracks. The walls became a final line. It was early 1836, and Texas was in revolt against Mexico. Many settlers and local fighters wanted more rights. Some wanted full independence. Mexico's leader, General Antonio López de Santa Anna, marched north with a large force, certain that strong pressure would end the rebellion. He wanted the rebels to feel fear, and he wanted the news to spread. When Santa Anna's soldiers arrived near San Antonio, the Alamo became a trap. The defenders inside were few. They were also different from one another: farmers, adventurers, former soldiers, men chasing land, men chasing pride. They did not always agree. They argued about plans and supplies. Arguing was easier than saying the truth out loud. The odds were terrible. 3 names would later rise above the rest. Travis was one. Another was Jim Bowie, bold and famous, carrying a reputation as sharp as his knife. Bowie did not like being ordered, and he did not always trust Travis. The third was Davy Crockett, a frontiersman known for his stories and confidence. Inside the Alamo, he was simply another man watching the horizon. The first truly frightening moment did not come from bullets. It came from a sight. The defenders looked out and saw Mexican soldiers spreading across the land. Flags lifted in the wind. Drums sounded in steady beats. The message was clear. The siege had begun. The world outside the Alamo had become an enemy, and the exits had become promises that could not be kept. Day and night, cannon fire hit the walls like heavy knocks. Stone chipped. Dust fell. Men covered their ears, then forced themselves back to their posts. Sleep became short and broken. Hunger grew. Thirst grew. Fear grew in quiet corners where no one wanted to admit it. Still, the defenders worked. They repaired weak points. They moved cannons. They counted bullets. They shared small meals. They watched each other for signs of panic. They tried not to imagine what would happen if the enemy poured over the walls. Travis watched his men and saw something complicated. Some were brave. Some were stubborn. Some were scared. Many were all 3 at once. He also knew that a story was forming, whether they wanted it or not. If they ran, people might call them cowards. If they stayed, people might call them heroes. But labels did not matter. What mattered was the next hour, the next watch, the next decision. Some stories say Travis drew a line in the dirt and asked the men to cross if they would stay and fight. People still argue about whether that exact scene happened, but the deeper truth is simple. Every defender faced a line inside his own mind. The line separated escape from commitment, fear from duty, life from a possible death that felt unavoidable. As the siege tightened, the Alamo stopped feeling like a mission or even a fort. It became a test. It asked a harsh question. What does a person hold on to when the world is closing in? The men inside did not know that the words "Remember the Alamo" would later spread across Texas. They only knew that dawn was coming, and the army outside was not leaving. Some men cleaned their muskets again and again, not because the guns needed it, but because their hands needed work. Others stared at the gate, thinking of families, debts, and unfinished promises. In the dim light, whispers moved faster than footsteps. Who would be first over the wall? Would help arrive? No one answered, and the waiting felt like another attack. In the last quiet hours before the storm, the Alamo held its breath. The men inside held theirs too, and beyond the walls, the next chapter was already marching forward. Long before it became a battlefield, the Alamo was a quiet place with a different purpose. It was not built for soldiers. It was built for everyday life. People came there to pray, to farm, to learn, and to survive in a hard land. The walls that later stopped bullets were first meant to hold a community together. In the early years, the Alamo was known as Mission San Antonio de Valero. It was one of several missions in the area. The land around it was rough, and life moved at a slow, steady pace. Work started early. Water had to be carried. Crops had to be planted. Animals had to be watched. At night, the mission became a shelter from cold winds and sudden danger. It was a place where people tried to build a future, one day at a time. The mission's buildings were simple but strong. Thick stone helped keep the heat out in the summer and the cold out in the winter. The chapel stood at the center, a place meant for calm, not chaos. Even so, the mission was never completely safe. This was a border region where power changed hands and trouble could arrive quickly. The mission learned, even in peaceful times, that it had to be ready. As years passed, Texas changed around the mission. Different governments claimed the land. New settlers arrived. Old rules were replaced by new ones. The people living in the region started to argue about who should make decisions and what laws should be followed. Some wanted more local control. Some wanted freedom from distant leaders. Some simply wanted stability and a fair chance to live. Then, slowly, the mission's role began to shift. Soldiers used the buildings. Supplies were stored behind the walls. The space that once held prayers began to hold weapons. It did not happen in one day. It happened over time, as need replaced tradition. The Alamo did not choose to become part of a war. It was pushed into it. In the early 1800s, tension grew stronger. Many settlers in Texas were from the United States, but Texas was still part of Mexico. People argued about laws, taxes, and power. Mexico had its own struggles, with leaders and systems changing. In that confusion, trust broke down. Some Texans believed Mexico was taking away rights. Some Mexican leaders believed the settlers were refusing to follow rules and becoming dangerous. Both sides began to see the other as a threat. By 1835 and 1836, those arguments had turned into fighting. The Texas Revolution was underway. Towns chose sides. Men formed groups and called themselves defenders of their cause. Some fought for Mexico, believing the nation must stay united. Others fought for Texas, believing they had the right to govern themselves. The air was full of rumors, speeches, and fear. During this time, the Alamo's location made it important. San Antonio sat on key routes. Whoever controlled the town could move troops and supplies more easily. The Alamo, with its thick stone walls and open courtyard, could serve as a defensive position. It was not a perfect fort, but it was something. In war, something can become a plan. That is how the Alamo became a target. When Texian forces took control of San Antonio, they moved into the Alamo. They believed they could hold it. They believed it could slow down the enemy. They believed, or at least hoped, that reinforcements would arrive if the fight became serious. They also believed that standing their ground would send a message. Texas would not back down. But the Alamo was full of problems. It was large, and that meant more wall to defend. Some parts were weak. Some buildings were not meant for combat. The defenders had limited food and limited ammunition. They had cannons, but not enough trained men to use them perfectly. And most of all, they did not have enough people. Still, they stayed. In the days before the siege, the mood inside the Alamo was uneasy. Men tried to improve the defenses. They dug, repaired, and placed cannons where they thought they would matter most. They discussed strategies. They argued. They joked to hide fear. Some wrote letters home. Others stayed quiet, as if speaking too much would make the danger real. The Alamo itself seemed to hold a memory of its earlier life. The stones had heard prayers. The courtyard had seen daily work. Now, it heard boots, orders, and the metallic sound of weapons being checked. The chapel that once held calm now held supplies. The walls that once protected a community now protected a small army. Then scouts brought warnings. Santa Anna was coming. The name carried weight. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna was not a distant rumor. He was a force. His soldiers were trained, organized, and numerous. He believed in power and control. He believed rebellion should be punished. When people heard he was marching north, many understood what it meant. This was not going to be a simple clash. This was going to be an example. As Santa Anna's army moved closer, the Alamo's biography entered a new chapter. It was no longer just a building with history. It was now a symbol standing in the path of a storm. And storms do not care what a place used to be. By the time the first Mexican troops appeared near San Antonio, the defenders could feel the pressure change, like air before lightning. The Alamo had been born as a mission, but it was about to be judged as a fortress, and the people inside were about to learn a hard truth. Some places become famous only because they are forced to suffer in front of the world. By the time the Alamo became a fortress, Texas was already boiling. It did not start with one gunshot or one angry speech. It started the way many real conflicts start, with small disagreements that people ignored, then repeated, then feared. Over time, those disagreements hardened into sides, and the sides hardened into enemies. Texas was part of Mexico, but Texas did not feel simple. Many people living there had different backgrounds, different languages, and different ideas about how life should work. Some families had lived in the region for generations. Others had moved in recently, hoping for land and a fresh start. In towns and farms, people argued about rules, taxes, and control. They argued about who should make decisions and how far a government could reach into daily life. In Mexico, politics were unstable. Leaders rose and fell. Laws changed. Promises were made, then taken back. In places far from the capital, these changes felt like waves hitting a shore. Each wave brought new rules, new confusion, and new anger. Many Texans believed they were being pushed around by leaders who did not understand their lives. Many Mexican officials believed Texas was becoming too independent, too difficult to manage, and too willing to break away at first. Some people hoped the problems could be fixed. They thought complaints could be heard and compromise could be reached. But hope is fragile when fear is growing. As tensions rose, both sides began to see danger in every move. A new law felt like a threat. A protest felt like rebellion. A rebellion felt like betrayal. Then men began to organize. They formed groups, trained, and gathered supplies. Some called themselves patriots. Some were simply scared and wanted to protect their homes. In these moments, motivation becomes mixed. A person can fight for freedom and also fight for pride. A person can fight for law and also fight for revenge. War does not sort these reasons neatly. It throws them together and calls them a cause. In late 1835, fighting began in a serious way. The conflict that would be known as the Texas Revolution started to take shape. Towns chose sides. Messengers carried news faster than anyone could calm it. Stories traveled, and each telling made the other side look worse. People who had once been neighbors began to watch each other with suspicion. Old friendships became risky. Silence became safer than speaking. In that heated atmosphere, one figure stood out like a shadow growing larger on the ground. General Antonio Lopez de Santa, Anna Santa. Anna was not just a man with a title. He was a man who believed order mattered more than comfort. He believed that a government had to be obeyed, and that rebellion had to be crushed before it became a habit. He also believed in the power of fear. If people feared the consequences, they would not rebel. That was his logic. And logic like that can be dangerous because it seems clean and simple. As Santa Anna prepared to march north, he made his plan clear. He would move fast. He would bring enough soldiers to end the rebellion. He would show Texas that resistance was hopeless. He did not want a long, messy conflict. He wanted a sharp end. To many Texans, Santa Anna's approach felt like a fist closing. Even people who had been unsure about rebellion began to feel trapped. When a leader comes with an army instead of a conversation, neutrality becomes difficult. Fear pushes people toward decisions they may not have made in calmer times. On the Texian side, leadership was not perfect either. The rebels did not have one smooth chain of command. Different groups had different priorities. Some wanted to defend towns. Some wanted to fight on open ground. Some wanted to hold key positions and slow Santa Anna's advance. Everyone wanted help, but help was limited. Supplies were scarce. Communication was slow. Trust was uneven. And still, the Alamo sat in the middle of it all. Like a match placed beside dry grass, San Antonio was important because it was a crossroads. Roads and routes passed through it. Whoever controlled the town could control movement and supply. The Alamo, standing inside San Antonio, became more than a building. It became a decision. To hold it was to say, we will stand here. To abandon it was to say, we will live to fight elsewhere. Neither choice felt safe. Holding it could become a death sentence. Leaving it could become shame, or worse, a strategic mistake. Men inside the Alamo argued about this with intensity, because the argument was really about survival. Some saw the Alamo as a symbol worth defending. Others saw it as a trap made of stone. But symbols are powerful in war, and symbols pull people into positions they might not choose in a purely practical world. The defenders believed that holding the Alamo could buy time. It could delay Santa Anna. It could inspire others. It could prove that Texians would not run. The problem was simple. Inspiration does not stop cannons. As Santa Anna moved closer, the mood in San Antonio changed. Shops closed early. Families whispered in their homes. People packed what they could carry. The streets felt tense, like the air before a storm. Those inside the Alamo felt it too. They did not need spies to tell them. They could sense it in the silence between cannon shots, in the nervous jokes that did not land, in the way men stared at the horizon longer than before. Santa Anna's army was not just approaching a fort, it was approaching a story. He likely believed he would end the rebellion by taking a strong point quickly and harshly. But he did not fully understand something about human beings. When people feel cornered, they do not always surrender. Sometimes they become more stubborn than logic should allow. That stubbornness was forming inside the Alamo. Men cleaned their weapons, checked their powder, and patched weak spots in the walls. They tried to look confident, because confidence can be contagious. But fear is contagious too, and it spreads faster in the dark. Each night, the defenders listened for movement outside the walls. Each morning, they counted supplies and tried not to count the enemy. This was how the war reached the Alamo, not in one step, but in many. Not by accident, but by pressure. The fire had spread, and now it was at the gates. And the next chapter would not be written with speeches. It would be written with the sound of drums, the flash of cannon fire, and choices made when there was no good choice left. When the Alamo became surrounded, the men inside did not feel like heroes. They felt like men caught in a tightening circle. Some were calm, some were angry, some were scared and tried to hide it. They were not a perfect team. They were a group of strangers and acquaintances forced to depend on each other. In that pressure, small problems became big problems, and pride became dangerous. The defenders came from different places and different lives. Some had fought before. Others had never faced a real battle. Some believed strongly in the Texas cause. Others were there for adventure, land, or loyalty to friends. They shared the same walls, the same cold nights, and the same question: how long can this place hold? Inside the fort, leadership was complicated. There was no smooth, easy chain of command that everyone trusted. The Alamo was too important, and the men inside were too proud. When people feel trapped, they often want control. When they cannot control the enemy, they try to control each other. That is how arguments begin. One leader was William Barrett Travis. He was young, but he carried himself like a man trying to look older. He spoke with sharp confidence, even when he felt unsure. He believed that surrender would be shameful and that standing firm would inspire others. Travis understood words and symbols. He knew the story of the Alamo could matter, even if the battle itself was lost. That belief gave him strength, but it also made him stubborn. Travis also carried a heavy burden. He had to keep men calm while knowing their situation was terrible. He had to order people to work, to watch, to fight, even when they were tired. He had to write letters asking for help and pretend he still believed help would come. He could not show fear, because fear in a leader spreads quickly. Another key figure was Jim Bowie. Bowie was older than Travis and famous in Texas for his toughness. Many men respected him, and some feared him. He had a strong personality and did not like being told what to do. Bowie believed in bold action. He trusted his instincts more than rules. When men talked about him, they spoke like he was already a legend. That made Bowie powerful inside the Alamo. But it also made leadership harder. Travis had official command, but Bowie had influence. In a calm situation, those differences might be managed. In a siege, they became sharp. The Alamo did not have room for divided leadership, but divided leadership is exactly what it had. The third name was Davy Crockett. Crockett had come from Tennessee and was known for his stories, his humor, and his public image. People expected him to be larger than life, like the tales told about him. But inside the Alamo, he was not a performer on a stage. He was a defender with a rifle, trying to survive like everyone else. Crockett's value was not only in fighting, it was in spirit. In dark times, a steady voice can be as important as a cannon. When men feel fear, they look for someone who can make them breathe again. Crockett could do that. He could speak casually when everyone else was tense. He could make a joke that reminded men they were still human. These three men, Travis, Bowie, and Crockett, were different in almost every way. Travis was strict and driven. Bowie was bold and proud. Crockett was calm and social. Their differences created friction, and friction inside a fortress is dangerous. But their differences also created balance. Each one carried something the others lacked. Around them were dozens of other defenders who rarely get remembered by name. Some were young, some were old, some had families nearby, some had no one waiting for them, some were Texians, some were volunteers from the United States. A few were Tejanos Texans of Mexican heritage who supported the rebel side. The Alamo was not one type of person, it was many types, pressed into one space. As the days passed, the siege shaped their lives. Men slept in short bursts, waking at every loud sound. They stood guard at night, eyes scanning the darkness. They ate small portions and tried not to complain. They carried water, repaired walls, and moved supplies. Routine became a way to stay sane. If they could keep working, they could keep fear from taking over. But tension grew. When food is low and sleep is broken, small disagreements explode. One man might accuse another of wasting ammunition. Another might blame leaders for not leaving earlier. Someone might speak about surrender, and the room would go quiet. In war, the word surrender can feel like poison. Travis tried to hold the group together with discipline. He pushed men to stay focused. He reminded them why they were there. Bowie, with his strong influence, could calm some men and stir up others. Crockett tried to keep morale alive, because morale is a kind of fuel. Without it, even a strong wall feels weak. Sometimes the men would look out and see the Mexican camp, and the sight would steal their breath. The enemy numbers seemed endless. Flags waved. Soldiers moved in organized lines. Drums beat, steady and confident. The defenders could feel the difference between a small group holding a fort and a large army prepared to take it. In those moments, reality hit like cold water. The Alamo was not just a symbol. It was a position that could be overrun. The defenders knew that, and knowing it changed everything. It made some men quiet. It made others restless. It made others more determined, as if stubbornness could change numbers. Still, they stayed. There were reasons for that choice. Some believed help would arrive. Some believed leaving would be dishonorable. Some believed the Alamo had to be held to delay Santa Anna. Some simply could not imagine running, and for some, the choice had already been made by time. They had waited too long. The enemy was too close. Escape was no longer simple, so the Alamo became a world of stone and stress. Inside it, leaders argued. Men worked, and fear grew in the corners like shadows at sunset. Outside it, Santa Anna's army tightened the grip. And as the siege continued, the defenders began to understand a hard truth. Even if they were brave, bravery alone would not decide what happened next. The next chapter would be written by pressure, by timing, and by the moment the enemy chose to strike. On February 23, 1836, the siege truly became real. Before that day, danger was a warning carried by messengers and rumors. After that day, danger was visible. It stood in the open. It moved like a machine, and it did not look away. Mexican soldiers arrived near San Antonio in organized ranks. The defenders inside the Alamo watched from behind stone and low walls. They saw flags in the wind and lines of men spreading across the land. They heard the steady beat of drums and the sharp calls of officers. Every sound seemed louder because it carried one meaning. The enemy was here at first. The defenders felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear was there, but so was energy. Some men rushed to their positions, relieved that waiting was over and the moment had finally come. Others felt sick in their stomachs, because seeing the army made the situation feel hopeless. A few tried to joke, but their jokes fell flat. Travis moved fast. He ordered the gates secured. He placed men along the walls and near the cannons. He checked the weak areas again, as if he could somehow fix the fort with willpower. The Alamo was large, and that size was a problem. A large fort needed a large force to defend it, and the defenders did not have a large force. Jim Bowie gave his opinions strongly. He had always believed in bold action, but bold action now had limits. The enemy was too close, and the defenders were too few. Davy Crockett watched quietly, then helped where he could, speaking to men in a calm voice that kept panic from spreading. Outside, Santa Anna's men set up camp and began to prepare. They brought cannons closer. They positioned troops. They created a ring of control around the Alamo. The defenders could see this happening, and it was like watching a rope tighten around their chest. One of the first painful truths of a siege is that it steals movement. It takes away options. A person can endure many things as long as they believe they can leave. Once leaving becomes impossible. Fear changes shape. It becomes heavier. It becomes constant. Soon, cannon fire began. It was not one huge blast that shattered the walls. It was repeated pounding, over and over. Each shot was a message. Time is running out. The stone absorbed the impact, but dust fell from the walls. Small pieces chipped away. The defenders listened for cracks, staring at the thick rock and hoping it would hold. Inside, the men tried to settle into a routine, because routine is a survival tool. Guards were set. Work was assigned. Ammunition was counted. Water was carried and rationed. Food was measured carefully. Small decisions became serious. How many bullets can be used in one day? How much powder can be spared? How long will the water last? As the siege continued, a new enemy arrived. Sleep became short and broken. Men leaned against walls with their eyes half open, waking at every boom of a cannon. Some grew angry and sharp. Others grew quiet and distant. People started to look older in just a few days. Travis understood that the Alamo needed more than guns. It needed hope. So he wrote letters. He wrote to commanders and communities, asking for reinforcements and supplies. He used strong words. He promised that the defenders would not surrender. He asked others to come quickly. When a leader writes a letter like that, he is not only speaking to the reader, he is speaking to the men beside him. He is trying to keep their hearts upright. But letters are slow, and armies are fast. Some defenders began to question the plan. They wondered why they were holding such a difficult position. The Alamo was not a perfect fort. Its walls were strong in places, but weak in others. There were open areas that were hard to defend, and the enemy had numbers. Everyone could see the truth. The Alamo could be taken if Santa Anna decided to push hard enough. Yet Santa Anna did not rush at first. That was another pressure. The Mexican army kept firing, kept watching, kept waiting, like a predator tiring out its prey. Every day without an assault forced the defenders to live in uncertainty. It is hard to fight an enemy you can see. It is sometimes harder to fight the fear of what will happen next. Inside the Alamo, men watched the horizon for help. They looked for dust clouds that might mean reinforcements. They listened for distant gunfire that might mean friendly forces were near. Each time they saw movement outside, their hearts jumped. Most of the time, it was only the enemy shifting positions. The defenders also faced a different kind of problem. Decisions about leaving. A siege does not trap everyone equally. Some men think about escape, especially at night. They consider slipping out under darkness, running past enemy lines, and saving their lives. But escape is dangerous. The enemy was close, and patrols watched the area. Leaving could mean being captured or killed. And even if someone escaped, he would have to live with what he left behind. That choice created tension between men. Some believed everyone should stay. Some believed leaving was the only smart move. Others did not talk about it at all, because talking about leaving could cause panic. In a small group under pressure, the idea of escape can feel like betrayal, even if it is only survival. Meanwhile, the Alamo itself seemed to change. The stone walls, the chapel, the courtyard, all of it became part of the struggle. The fort held the defenders, but it also held their fear. The same walls that protected them also reminded them they were surrounded. The Alamo was both shield and cage. As days passed, the men started to feel time differently. One day could feel like a week. A single night watch could feel endless. They began to measure life in cannon shots and guard shifts, not in hours. In that kind of pressure, even strong men break, not always with screams, but with silence. Still, the defenders prepared. They checked their weapons again. They reinforced weak spots. They practiced moving to positions quickly. They tried to imagine the assault, because imagining it was a way to control it in their minds. But the assault, when it came, would not follow their imagination. By the end of these early siege days, the trap had fully closed. The enemy ring was tight. The defenders were tired. Supplies were limited. Help had not arrived, and the meaning of the Alamo was changing. It was no longer just a fort being held. It was becoming a test. Watched by history. Outside the walls, Santa Anna's army waited for the right moment. Inside the walls, the defenders waited too, caught between hope and fear, between pride and survival, between the life they had known and the end that might be near. As the siege continued, the Alamo stopped feeling like a place and started feeling like a clock that would not stop ticking. Every day looked similar, but each day made the defenders weaker. The cannon fire never truly ended. It might slow for a while, then begin again. The sound became part of the air, like wind or distant thunder. Men flinched less, not because they were calmer, but because their bodies were running out of energy to react. Inside the walls, life turned into a strict cycle. Guard duty, repairs, eating small portions, sleeping in short pieces, waking up too soon, then doing it all again. It was not heroic, it was survival. And survival, after enough days, becomes a heavy job. Travis walked the fort often, watching faces and listening to voices. He could tell who was holding steady and who was close to breaking. A leader cannot fix hunger or silence cannon fire, but he can manage the mood. So he spoke firmly. He gave orders with confidence. He praised men when he could. He tried to keep discipline strong, because discipline was the last solid thing they had. Bowie, meanwhile, struggled with sickness. He was not the loud, unstoppable figure many expected. He was tired, weak, and often confined. That changed the balance inside the Alamo. Travis had to carry more responsibility. Some men who trusted Bowie felt uneasy. Others saw Travis as the clear leader now. But even clear leadership could not solve the biggest problem. There were still too few defenders for too many walls. Crockett stayed active among the men. He listened, spoke, and tried to keep spirits from sinking too low. He understood something simple. Fear grows fastest in silence. If men sit together in the dark with no words, their minds create the worst stories. So Crockett filled some of that darkness with calm talk. He reminded men they were not alone. He acted like a steady hand on a shaking table, but no one could fully stop the pressure. The siege pressed on their bodies and their minds. At night, the Alamo felt different. Darkness makes threats feel closer. Shadows make distances unclear. Every sound turned suspicious. The defenders strained their ears for footsteps outside. Sometimes they heard animals. Sometimes they heard the enemy moving. Sometimes they heard nothing, and the nothing was worst of all. Men stood on the walls, staring out at the Mexican campfires. There were so many lights that it looked like a second sky on the ground. Those fires were not just warmth, they were a message. The enemy had food, men, and time. The defenders had less of all three dots. Sleep became a battlefield. Some men lay down and could not rest because their mind kept repeating the same question. When will they attack? Others slept for minutes and woke up startled, certain they had heard shouting. A few began to talk in their sleep. A few began to stare too long at nothing, their minds drifting to strange places. This is what long fear does. It steals attention. It steals patience. It steals normal thinking. Hunger made it worse. Meals were small and plain. Men tried to eat slowly to make food last longer. Some traded small items for an extra bite. Some gave part of their food to a friend who looked weaker. Others grew protective of what they had. Hunger can make good men selfish, not because they want to be, but because the body demands it. Water was precious too. It was measured, watched, and sometimes argued over. A man who wasted water could be punished, not because leadership was cruel, but because waste could become death. Every resource mattered. Every mistake had a cost. Then there was the constant work. Cannon fire damaged walls and buildings again and again. Men repaired cracks, moved sandbags, and reinforced weak areas. They carried heavy objects until their arms shook. They cleaned weapons, checked powder, and prepared shot. Their hands were always busy. In a siege, if hands are not busy, minds become dangerous. Still, even with work, some thoughts would not leave. Some defenders began to talk quietly about escape. Not loudly, not openly, but inside conversations that ended when someone approached. They imagined slipping out at night, crawling low, moving fast, and disappearing into the dark. They imagined reaching friendly forces, bringing back reinforcements, or at least saving their own lives. But escape was not simple. The Mexican army was close. Patrols moved around the fort. The ground outside offered little cover. A man could make it 10 steps and be seen. He could be captured, and capture could mean a harsh end. The risk was real. Also, there was shame. Not everyone felt it the same way, but it existed. Some men believed leaving was dishonor. Others believed leaving was smart. Some did not care about honor at all and only wanted to see tomorrow. Under pressure, people reveal their true priorities, and those priorities do not always match. Travis knew these thoughts were spreading, even if no one said them to his face. He did not want to crush men with harsh words, but he also could not allow the group to break apart. So he focused on unity. He reminded them why they were there. He spoke about duty and purpose. He spoke about holding the fort as long as possible. He made the fight feel meaningful, because meaning gives people strength when logic runs out. And still, time kept moving. Each day without help felt like a door closing. Every sunset felt like a warning. The defenders kept looking for assigned dust clouds, distant riders, a message from friendly forces. Sometimes a rider did arrive, but not with enough men, not with enough supplies, not with the miracle they needed. The Alamo, in those days, became a pressure cooker. It held heat and fear inside its walls. It forced men to live close together, to breathe the same air, to share the same dread. Small problems became larger. A harsh word could start an argument. A careless act could cause anger. Men who would normally be patient became sharp. Men who would normally speak became silent. Yet something else also grew inside the fort, a strange, stubborn bond. When people suffer together, they often stop pretending. They see each other clearly. They learn who will stand watch without complaint, who will share food, who will keep working when exhausted. They learn who they can trust. In the middle of the night, while cannon fire rumbled in the distance, a defender might look at the man beside him and realize he is still here. That thought mattered. It mattered more than pride, more than politics, because in a siege, loyalty is not a speech. It is simply staying. By the end of this part of the siege, the defenders were no longer waiting for an attack, as if it might never come. They were waiting as if it could come at any moment. Their nerves were stretched thin. Their bodies were tired. Their supplies were lower. And the enemy outside was still there come, organized and patient. The Alamo kept standing, but inside it, men could feel something changing. The siege was not only wearing down the walls, it was wearing down the future. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the fort, Santa Anna's final decision was getting closer. By the second week of the siege, the Alamo felt smaller than it looked. The walls were wide, the courtyard was open, and the buildings were spread out. Yet the men inside felt as if they were living in a tightening fist. The enemy was close enough that the defenders could see movement and hear distant commands. They could smell smoke from campfires outside. They could count the days without counting them out loud. In that kind of pressure, a person's thoughts change. At first, many men had told themselves they were holding the Alamo until help arrived. They imagined reinforcements riding in at the last moment, cheering, bringing food and fresh strength. But as day after day passed, hope became thinner. It did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became a quiet wish instead of a solid plan. William Barrett Travis understood this shift. He could feel it in the way men spoke. He could see it in their eyes. They still worked. They still stood guard. They still loaded cannons. But there was a difference between we can win and we can hold. The second idea is heavier. It asks for endurance, not victory. Travis carried that weight alone more often now. Jim Bowie, once so powerful inside the fort, was weaker. Illness kept him down, and the men could no longer look to him as a loud center of confidence. Travis became the firm voice by necessity. He became the face of the Alamo's decision. Travis also knew something painful. The enemy did not need to attack quickly. Santa Anna could wait and wear them down. The defenders had limited food, limited water, and limited rest. Time was not neutral. Time was an enemy. Davy Crockett watched all this with a calm that did not come from ignorance. It came from experience. He had seen politics and disappointment. He had seen promises fail. He understood that men do not break only from bullets. They break from uncertainty. So he stayed among the defenders, speaking quietly, keeping them focused on the next task, the next watch, the next small victory of simply staying steady. But even Crockett could not stop the biggest question from spreading. Should they leave? It was not a simple question. It was not asked loudly in meetings, because the word leave carried danger. It sounded like surrender. It sounded like quitting. Yet it was asked in whispers, in corners, in looks exchanged when the cannons paused. Some men believed they should have left earlier, before the enemy ring closed. They believed the Alamo was too hard to defend, too open, too large for their small numbers. They believed the smart move was to retreat, save lives, and fight somewhere else. They did not want to die in a stone box. Other men felt the opposite. They believed leaving would shame them and harm the cause. They believed that holding the Alamo mattered beyond the fort itself. They believed their stand would inspire others. They believed the delay could give Texas time to organize. They believed the message was worth the risk. And some men did not think in big political words at all. They thought about their families, their debts, their unfinished lives, the letter they had not written, the child they might never see again. Their reasons were private, and that privacy made them even heavier. This is where the story turns. Not with a cannon blast, but with a human moment. Later, people would tell a famous story, that Travis drew a line in the dirt and asked men to cross if they were willing to stay and fight. Some say it happened. Some say it was added later. The exact details may be debated. But the truth beneath it is clear. A choice had to be made. The Alamo did not allow anyone to live on half decisions forever. The siege forced clarity. It forced men to face what they were really doing there. If they stayed, they might die. If they tried to leave, they might still die. But leaving meant running from the fight, and for some men, that felt worse than death. Travis did not have the luxury of being gentle with reality. He had to speak it. He had to make the moment plain. A leader cannot pretend forever. Pretending breaks a group faster than truth does. So Travis made the situation clear. Help might not come. The enemy was strong. The assault would likely be brutal. Every man had to decide what he would do. The fort grew quiet as the meaning landed. A quiet like that is different from fear. It is the silence of understanding. It is the moment when a person stops imagining and starts accepting. Some defenders looked down at their hands. Some stared at the walls. Some glanced toward the gate as if the gate could answer them. One man may have thought of his mother. Another may have thought of his wife. Another may have thought of nothing at all, because his mind had gone numb. Then came the movements, the small motions that revealed a decision. A man shifts his feet and steps forward. Another follows. Another stays where he is, frozen. Another looks around, ashamed, then stands taller and moves. Another does not move at all, not because he is a coward, but because his body refuses the idea of dying in that place. This is what makes the Alamo story powerful. It is not a tale of perfect heroes. It is a tale of people under pressure, making choices with incomplete information. No one knew the exact hour the assault would come. No one knew if help might still appear. No one knew if a miracle might happen. They only knew the odds. For those who chose to stay, the choice changed them. It did not remove fear. It gave fear a shape. It turned fear into something they could carry. When a person accepts the risk, the mind stops fighting reality and starts preparing. After that moment, men worked with a different focus. They repaired walls with more care. They checked weapons with more attention. They positioned cannons and practiced moving quickly. They spoke less, but when they spoke, their words were sharper and more meaningful. Some defenders wrote letters, short ones, honest ones, not speeches, not promises, simple messages that tried to fit a lifetime into a few lines. A man might fold a piece of paper slowly, as if slowing time could change the ending. Others did not write anything. They sat quietly, staring at the stone around them, listening to the distant sounds of the enemy camp. They tried to memorize the faces of the men beside them. In desperate places, people often become historians of the moment, because they sense it will matter later. Travis, in private moments, likely felt the fear he could not show. Even the strongest leader has a human heart, but he held his posture. He kept his voice steady. He stayed visible. A leader's presence is a kind of shelter, and the Alamo needed every shelter it could get by the end of Part 7. Something had shifted inside the Alamo. It was no longer only a fort under attack. It had become a decision made by many individuals at once, a place where men chose to stand, not because they believed it would be easy, but because they believed it would mean something. Outside the walls, Santa Anna's army continued its preparations. Inside the walls, the defenders prepared too not for victory, but for impact. That emotional turn had happened. They were no longer waiting for history to choose them. They had chosen their place in history. The night before the final assault felt strange inside the Alamo. It was not peaceful, but it was quieter in the minds of the men who had already made their choice. They still feared what was coming, yet fear had stopped running in circles. It had become steady, like a heavy coat that could not be removed. The defenders stayed close to their positions. Some sat with their backs against stone, eyes half open, listening. Others moved slowly, checking muskets, counting powder, and touching the cold metal of cannon parts as if the metal could promise strength. In the dark, small sounds felt huge: a boot, scraping, a cough, a whispered word. Outside the walls, Santa Anna's army did not sleep in the same way. The camp had its own rhythm. Orders passed from officer to officer, groups forming and shifting, men moving into place. The Mexican soldiers had been preparing for days, building pressure like a hand tightening around a rope. Now, the rope was ready to snap, dot before dawn, on March 6, 1836. The attack began. It did not start with a long warning. It began with movement in the darkness, many men at once, advancing in organized groups. The defenders heard the first signs: sudden noise, faster footsteps, urgent shouts. Then the shape of the assault appeared through the night, and the Alamo woke up all at once. Travis was among the first to react. He moved to his post with speed that came from practice and instinct. He shouted orders that cut through the confusion. The defenders rushed to the walls. Muskets were raised. Cannons were aimed. Men loaded, fired, and reloaded, their hands working even when their minds were struggling to keep up. The first moments were loud and sharp. Gunfire cracked. Smoke began to gather, turning the air heavy. In the dim light, it was hard to see clearly, and that made everything more frightening. Shapes moved below the walls. Voices shouted in Spanish and English. Commands collided with panic. The fort, which had felt like a cage, now felt like a shaking ship in a storm. The Alamo's walls had been the defenders' main hope, but walls do not fight by themselves. Walls need men, and the defenders did not have enough men for every section. That was the truth the siege had been pointing toward from the beginning. As the Mexican troops pushed forward, the defenders tried to cover every approach. They fired from the walls and from openings. They moved from one position to another, doing their best to plug gaps. But gaps still formed, because exhaustion is a real enemy. A tired man reloads slower. A tired man misses more. A tired man hesitates for 1 second too long. The Mexican soldiers kept coming. The attack pressed toward the walls like a rising tide. Even when men fell back, other men stepped into their place. This was the power of numbers. It is not only about strength, it is about replacement. The defenders could not replace themselves. Every loss inside the Alamo was final. As the assault continued, ladders were raised and pushed against the stone. The defenders fired down, trying to stop the climb. They used anything they could. They shouted warnings to each other. They fought for each section of wall as if that section was the whole world. The Alamo, which had once been a mission and then a fort, now became something else, a maze of last stands. Every corner mattered. Every doorway became a decision. Every few steps felt like the edge of a cliff. When attackers finally gained access over the walls, the fight changed instantly. The battle was no longer only at the edges. It was inside the fort. The defenders fell back from open spaces into tighter positions. The sounds changed to less distant, firing, more close chaos. Shouting echoed off stone. Smoke moved through rooms. The morning light began to appear, but it did not bring clarity. It only showed more of the struggle. Davy Crockett stayed with other defenders, moving where he was needed. His calm did not erase danger, but it helped others keep moving. He fought as a man among men, not as a storybook figure. In moments like that, fame does not protect anyone. Only actions do. Jim Bowie, weakened and unable to move like before, could not lead the way he once had. Still, his name remained inside the fort like a hard memory, a reminder of earlier confidence. The Alamo was full of such reminders. Every man carried a past version of himself into that fight, but the battle did not care who anyone had been yesterday. Travis continued to command as long as he could. He had insisted on holding the Alamo. Now he lived inside the results of that decision. In those moments, leadership was not strategy anymore. It was courage under collapse. It was keeping others focused when the plan was being crushed by reality. As the attackers pushed deeper, the defenders were forced into smaller and smaller spaces. Some fought from behind walls. Some fired from windows. Others used their weapons until there was no time to reload. The fort's buildings, once meant for calm work, were now filled with urgency. This is the part of the Alamo story that is often simplified. People sometimes imagine one clean scene, one perfect last speech, one single moment that sums it all up. Real battles are not like that. Real battles are messy. They happen in pieces, in confusion, and sudden turns. They are made of dozens of small moments, each one too fast to become a legend while it is happening. As sunrise approached, the end came closer. The defenders had been brave, but bravery was not enough to hold back an organized force with a huge advantage. The Alamo fell, not because the defenders lacked spirit, but because the situation was built to break them. When the fighting finally stopped, the fort felt silent in a way that did not feel like peace. It felt like emptiness. Smoke drifted. Morning light touched the stones that had seen too much. The place that had once been a mission and then a fortress now stood as a captured ground. Santa Anna had taken the Alamo. But even in that moment of victory, a new problem was already forming for him. Because the Alamo was no longer only a fort in San Antonio. It had become a story. And stories, once they spread, are difficult to control. The defenders were gone. The battle was over. Yet the Alamo, strangely, was not finished. It was about to be remembered. When the sun rose on March 6, 1836, the Alamo was no longer a fortress holding out against an army. It was a captured place filled with silence, smoke, and broken stone. The fighting had ended, but the meaning of what happened was only beginning. General Santa Anna had achieved what he came for. He took the Alamo. He showed force. He proved that his army could break a position that refused to surrender. In his mind, this victory was supposed to crush the rebellion's spirit. It was supposed to scare Texans into giving up. It was supposed to make the future simple. But the future did not become simple. It became louder. Santa Anna faced a problem that armies often create without noticing. The defeated can become more powerful in memory than the victorious are in reality. The Alamo was not just a military event anymore. It was a story that traveled faster than horses. It moved from mouth to mouth, town to town, camp to camp, growing stronger with every retelling. People did not hear about the Alamo in a calm, careful way. They heard it in pieces. They heard it in frightened whispers and angry shouts. They heard it from riders who had seen smoke on the horizon. They heard it from families who waited for men who never returned. They heard it from leaders who needed their people to keep fighting. The details were not always the same, but the feeling was shock. The feeling was grief. And then, very quickly, the feeling became anger. For many Texans, the Alamo was painful because it felt personal. It was not a distant battle on a far border. It was in San Antonio. It involved men whose names were known. Some had friends there. Some had relatives. Others simply felt that the Alamo represented their cause. When it fell, it felt like a wound. But wounds can do more than weaken. They can create determination. In the days after the Alamo, the Texian side faced a dangerous moment. Fear spread fast. Some families fled east to escape the Mexican army. Wagons rolled across muddy ground. People carried what they could. Children cried. Parents tried to act strong. This movement of civilians later became known as a runaway flight, because so many were running from the threat. This fear was exactly what Santa Anna wanted. He believed panic would break the rebellion. He believed people would surrender just to make the fear stop. Yet something else happened at the same time. While some ran, others decided they could not run forever. They understood that if Santa Anna kept moving, the fear would follow them. So the Alamo, instead of ending resistance, began to shape it. Texian leaders used the story to build unity. They spoke about the defenders as men who stood when they did not have to. They spoke about courage against heavy odds. They spoke about sacrifice. They did not speak about mistakes or arguments or confusion. In times like these, people do not want complicated truth. They want a clear message that gives them strength. And a phrase began to rise like fire. Remember the Alamo. It was simple. It was sharp. It fit in the mouth like a command. It did not ask for debate. It demanded action. It turned grief into focus. It turned loss into energy. It gave people a reason to keep going when their nerves were tired and their homes felt unsafe. This was the great twist of the Alamo. The defenders lost the battle, but their stand became a tool. It became a weapon made of memory. No cannon could stop it. No army could arrest it. The more Santa Anna tried to control Texas with fear, the more this story worked against him. While the story spread, the war continued. Texian forces gathered under Sam Houston, who understood he could not fight Santa Anna's army head-on right away. Houston pulled back, trying to build strength and find the right moment. Some people criticized him. They wanted revenge immediately. They wanted to fight now, while anger was hot. But Houston was careful. He knew anger can burn quickly and leave nothing. He wanted anger shaped into strategy. As weeks passed, the Texian army grew. Men joined not only because they wanted land or politics, but because they felt pulled by the Alamo. The image of defenders standing behind stone walls, facing an army, became a reason to pick up a rifle. It became a reason to endure harsh marshes and low food. It became a reason to risk death. Meanwhile, Santa Anna pushed deeper, divided his forces, and continued believing he was in control. He believed the rebellion was almost finished. He believed the Alamo had proven it. But battles do not only happen on the ground, they also happen inside minds. And inside Texian minds, the Alamo had planted something hard to remove: the belief that surrender was no longer acceptable. A person who might have been willing to compromise before might now feel that compromise would dishonor the dead. This is how wars become more intense after a tragedy. The tragedy changes what people are willing to accept. The Alamo also changed how Texans saw themselves. Before, many were uncertain. They argued about goals and leadership. After the Alamo, the cause became clearer for many. They wanted Santa Anna's army gone. They wanted control over their lives. They wanted an ending that felt like justice. This is why, later, at the Battle of San Jacinto, Texian soldiers would charge with that phrase in their mouths. Remember, the Alamo was not only a memory of defeat, it was a promise of response. And this is where the biography of the Alamo becomes strange and powerful. The Alamo died as a fort that fell, but it lived as a symbol that grew. A place built for quiet faith had become a loud rallying cry. Santa Anna did not fully understand that kind of power. He understood armies, laws, and authority. But symbols do not follow orders. They move through people. They grow when people repeat them. They harden when people believe them. By the end of Part 9, the Alamo had transformed into something larger than stone. It had become a turning point in emotion, a defeat that created unity, a loss that created pressure, a tragedy that created momentum. The battle was over, but the war was not. And now, the Texian side was no longer only fighting for land or politics. They were fighting for a story, and stories can be very hard to defeat. Weeks after the Alamo fell, the war kept moving, but something in Texas had changed. The defenders who died behind those stone walls were gone, yet their absence did not feel like an ending. It felt like a heavy presence that followed everyone who still carried a rifle. Santa Anna continued his campaign, confident that fear would do the work for him. He believed the Alamo proved that resistance was useless. He believed that if Texas saw the price of rebellion, Texas would stop rebelling. In the short term, he was not wrong. Many civilians fled. Some towns panicked. People ran east with wagons, children, and whatever they could save. The land looked like it was folding under pressure. But fear does not always create surrender. Sometimes it creates a single clear thought: not again. Sam Houston, leading the Texian army, chose not to rush into a large battle right away. He retreated, gathered men, and waited for a moment when the enemy would be vulnerable. Some Texans hated this. They wanted an immediate strike. They wanted revenge. They wanted the Alamo answered with fire. Houston understood their anger, but he also understood the danger of fighting at the wrong time. He knew he needed more than emotion. He needed an opening. That opening came on April 21st, 1836. At San Jacinto, Santa Anna's forces were tired and spread out. The Texian army attacked fast and hard. The battle was short and violent, and it ended with a major Texian victory. Santa Anna was captured soon after. The war did not end in one clean moment, but San Jacinto changed everything. It turned the Texian cause from desperate resistance into real power. And through it all, the phrase stayed alive: remember the Alamo. Those words did not bring the defenders back. They did not erase the loss, but they gave people focus. They gave people a shared memory. And in war, shared memory becomes shared strength. This is the true resolution of the Alamo's biography. The Alamo was not only a battle site, it became a meaning-making machine. It took a brutal defeat and turned it into a force that shaped the rest of the war. In that way, the Alamo did what few places ever do. It became larger than its own walls. Over time, the Alamo story spread beyond Texas. People repeated the names Bowie, Crockett, till those names became symbols themselves. For many, they represented courage and sacrifice. For others, they represented conflict, conquest, and painful history. The Alamo became a mirror. Different people looked at it and saw different truths. That is important. Real history is rarely one simple lesson. The Alamo is not just a tale of good and evil. It is a story shaped by politics, identity, power, and human choices made under fear. It includes bravery, but it also includes mistakes. It includes loyalty, but it also includes disagreement. It includes sacrifice, but it also includes the hard fact that sacrifice does not guarantee victory in the moment. Yet the reason the Alamo remains famous is not only because of what happened, it is because of what people felt. Inside the Alamo, men faced a kind of decision most people never want to face. They stood in a place they could have left earlier. They watched an army grow closer. They heard cannon fire day after day. They lived with hunger, exhaustion, and dread. And at some point, they accepted that survival was not guaranteed. Some stayed because they believed in the cause. Some stayed because they believed in honor. Some stayed because leaving no longer felt possible. Some stayed because the men beside them stayed. Human reasons are often tangled. But the result was clear. They held the Alamo until the end, when the fort fell. Santa Anna believed he had won a clean victory, but the Alamo did not behave like a normal victory. It became a warning to Texans and a rallying cry at the same time. It became the emotional center of the Texas Revolution. It became proof, in many minds, that the conflict could not be settled with fear alone. That is why the Alamo still stands in memory, not because it was the biggest battle, not because it was the most strategic location. It stands because it turned into a story people could carry, And once people carry a story, the story can outlive a war. The biography of the Alamo begins as a mission, a place of faith and daily labor. It becomes a fort, a place of weapons and urgent planning. It falls as a battlefield filled with smoke and loss. And then it rises again, not as stone, but as symbol. This is the strange final truth. The Alamo died on March 6, 1836, but it did not stay dead. It lived in letters and speeches. It lived in marching footsteps. It lived in the shout of "Remember the Alamo." It lived in how people explained courage to themselves. And today, when people speak of the Battle of the Alamo, they are often speaking about more than history. They are speaking about what humans do when the future narrows. They are speaking about fear and pride, sacrifice and meaning. They are speaking about a place that became a turning point because people refused to let it be forgotten. In the end, the Alamo became what many lives never become. A moment that history could not swallow quietly. It became an echo. If this biography moved you, subscribe for more true, story-driven history, told like a movie, but rooted in real life. And comment below, who should get the next full biography: Travis, Bowie, Crockett, Santa Anna, or Sam Houston? If you learned something new, share this video with a friend who loves real stories that still feel human.